1944, Nazi commanders believed their U-boats were the untouchable ghosts of the Atlantic, until a rogue American task force did the unthinkable. They didn't just sink a U-boat. They boarded it, stole its deepest secrets, and towed Hitler's pride back to America as a trophy. To understand the sheer arrogance of the German Navy and the magnitude of what the Americans accomplished, one must go back to the darkest days of the Battle of the Atlantic. For the first 4 years of the Second World War, the North Atlantic was not merely a theater of war. It was a vast, unforgiving graveyard engineered by Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz and his Kriegsmarine. The Atlantic Ocean was the lifeline of the free world. Every bullet, every gallon of high-octane aviation fuel, every tank, and every loaf of bread needed to keep Great Britain alive and prepare for the eventual liberation of Europe had to cross thousands of miles of open, freezing water. The German U-boat fleet moved through these pitch-black waters like an invisible, ruthless phalanx. They operated under a tactical doctrine of absolute brutality devised by Dönitz himself, known as the Rudel tactic, the wolf pack. The strategy was as simple as it was devastating. Groups of steel predators would submerge during the day, hiding beneath the thermal layers of the ocean where primitive Allied sonar could not reach them. At night, they would surface in the middle of vulnerable, slow-moving Allied merchant convoys. Operating on the surface, the U-boats were faster than most escort vessels of the era. They struck from the shadows, firing salvo after salvo of steam-driven torpedoes into the unprotected flanks of cargo ships. To the merchant mariners carrying these vital supplies, civilian sailors from America, Britain, Canada, and Norway, the Atlantic was an execution chamber. Ships were blown in two without warning. Thousands of men were burned alive in slick pools of flaming crude oil, or left to freeze to death in wooden lifeboats in the howling sub-zero winds of the North Atlantic. In 1942 alone, German U-boats sank over 8 million tons of Allied shipping. The losses were so severe that for months the supply lines were near total collapse. In Berlin, the Nazi high command watched the casualty figures rise with supreme confidence and utter condescension toward their Western adversaries. Grand Admiral Dönitz repeatedly boasted to Adolf Hitler that his U-boat fleet would single-handedly starve the British Isles into unconditional surrender long before a single American division could be trained, equipped and transported across the sea. And for a painfully long time, the cold mathematical reality backed up his claims. Along the eastern seaboard of the United States, during a period the German U-boat captains gleefully named the Second Happy Time, American coastlines became hunting grounds. Oil tankers burst into towering pillars of fire off the shores of North Carolina, Virginia, and Massachusetts. On summer nights in 1942, American vacationers standing on the boardwalks of New Jersey could see the horizon glowing red with the burning hulls of torpedoed ships. At the absolute center of this German operational confidence was a masterwork of electromechanical engineering, the Enigma machine. Every order sent from Kriegsmarine headquarters in Paris and Berlin to the U-boats scattered across millions of square miles of ocean was scrambled through complex rotors, reflector wheels, and plugboard wiring. The Germans mathematically calculated that the Enigma cipher offered trillions of potential combinations, making it, in their eyes, completely unbreakable by human or mechanical means. To make the naval Enigma even more impenetrable, the Kriegsmarine added a fourth rotor, the Triton cipher, or M4, specifically to blind Allied intelligence. Furthermore, German naval doctrine regarding the security of the Enigma was fanatical. Every U-boat commander carried ironclad, non-negotiable orders. If a submarine was ever severely damaged and forced to surface, the captain was obligated to execute immediate scuttling protocols. Special sea valves were to be opened to flood the bilge. Explosive demolition charges were to be detonated in the engineering spaces. The Enigma rotors were to be pulled and thrown into the sea. And all secret code books printed in water-soluble red ink were to be thrown overboard or destroyed. The secrets of the Reich were meant to die at the bottom of the ocean. The idea that an enemy could ever step foot on a floating German U-boat and capture an Enigma machine intact was considered an absolute physical impossibility by the German high command. To the naval elite in Berlin, the Americans were soft, undisciplined, and culturally incapable of waging sustained, brutal sea warfare. They viewed the United States Navy as an inexperienced, industrial brute force, a nation capable of mass-producing steel and churning out cargo ships from assembly lines, but lacking the tactical cunning, the iron discipline, and the warrior spirit of the seasoned veterans of the Kriegsmarine. The Germans genuinely believed they owned the Atlantic Ocean. They believed their technology was beyond human reach. Their wolfpack tactics were infallible, and their submarines were phantom predators that could never be captured. They were dead wrong. Because while Germany was busy congratulating itself on its technical superiority, the United States Navy was quietly engineering a silent revolution in naval warfare. A total overhaul of strategy, technology and mindset that would turn the German hunters into the helpless hunted. The United States Navy did not panic in the face of the U-boat threat. Instead, American naval strategists approached the problem with cold, calculating industrial efficiency and a level of tactical adaptability that caught the Kriegsmarine completely off guard. By late 1943, the U.S. Navy officially abandoned the passive strategy of merely defending convoys. They realized that escorting cargo ships was inherently reactive. It meant waiting for the German wolves to strike first before attempting to counterattack. The Americans decided it was time to change the rules of engagement. They were going to hunt the wolves in their own lair. This shift in philosophy gave birth to one of the most effective naval formations in history, the hunter-killer groups. These were specialized, highly aggressive anti-submarine task forces built around a new class of warship, the escort carrier, affectionately known by American sailors as the Jeep carrier. These vessels were built on modified commercial hulls, rapidly assembled in American shipyards and deployed in high numbers. Though small compared to fleet carriers, a Jeep carrier packed a lethal air wing of Grumman TBF Avenger torpedo bombers and FM-2 Wildcat fighters. Paired with a division of 4 to 6 fast, heavily armed destroyer escorts, these hunter-killer units did not stay tied to slow merchant fleets. Instead, they roamed the open ocean freely, aggressively searching for U-boat positions using cutting-edge American technology. Chief among these technological breakthroughs was Huff Duff, high-frequency direction finding. German U-boats were required to send frequent radio transmissions back to Germany to report convoy sightings and weather conditions. American shore stations and warships equipped with Huff Duff antennae could intercept these brief high-frequency radio bursts, process the signal instantly, and triangulate a U-boat's exact geographic position within a matter of minutes. Once a general location was identified, the hunter-killer group would close in. The Jeep carrier would launch aircraft equipped with surface search radar, capable of spotting a U-boat's snorkel or wake through dense fog and pitch-black nights. Among the commanders leading these hunter-killer task forces was a man who perfectly embodied the bold, unapologetic, and fiercely independent spirit of American naval aviation, Captain Daniel Viff Gallery. Commanding Task Group 22.3, centered around the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal, Captain Gallery was not a typical naval officer. He was a pioneer, a former Olympic wrestler, and a commander who believed that standard military protocols were meant to be improved upon. To Gallery, simply dropping depth charges and sinking a German submarine was a job half done. He wanted something that naval doctrine deemed impossible. He wanted to capture a German U-boat alive on the high seas. When Captain Gallery first raised the idea of boarding an operational enemy submarine in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, his superiors in the Atlantic Fleet viewed it as an absurd, almost suicidal fantasy. A Type 9 German U-boat was a floating death trap for an invading force. It was equipped with internal scuttling charges designed to detonate within minutes of an abandoned ship order. Its interior was a claustrophobic maze of high-voltage conduits, toxic lead-acid batteries, booby traps, and armed German submariners trained to fight to the death. Furthermore, no enemy warship had been boarded and captured on the high seas by the United States Navy since the War of 1812, during the era of wooden sailing ships and cutlasses. Captain Gallery casually ignored the skepticism of the High Command. On board the Guadalcanal and its 5 accompanying destroyer escorts, the USS Pillsbury, USS Pope, USS Flaherty, USS Shetland, and USS Jenks, Gallery began quietly preparing for the impossible. He issued a call for volunteers across the task force to form specialized boarding parties. These were not Marine shock troops. They were young American sailors, engineers, motor machinists, and electricians who volunteered for extra training. Gallery had them train incessantly. They practiced lowering motor whaleboats into rough seas, leaping onto moving targets carrying heavy gasoline-powered salvage pumps, cutting through steel hatches with heavy axes, and learning basic hand-to-hand combat in confined spaces. Gallery's order to his men was simple. If a German submarine surfaces near the task force, we do not just blow it to pieces. We hit it with light anti-aircraft fire to clear the deck, drive the crew into the water before they can trigger the scuttling charges, jump onto the deck, and take the ship. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in the submarine pens of Lorient, France, a Type 1C German submarine designated U-505 was preparing for its 10th war patrol. The U-505 was a long-range 100-ton ocean-going submarine, a marvel of German engineering designed to operate far out in the South Atlantic and Indian Oceans. She was commanded by Oberleutnant zur See Harold Lange, a proud officer who believed his ship and his crew represented the pinnacle of Kriegsmarine discipline. Armed with 22 deadly acoustically guided torpedoes, reinforced double-hull steel plating, and an experienced crew of 58 men, the U-505 slipped into the Atlantic with complete confidence in its technological superiority. What Oberleutnant Lange did not know was that the U-505 was a ship plagued by bad luck, a boat that German sailors quietly whispered was cursed. On previous patrols, she had been heavily damaged by RAF bombers, suffered endless mechanical breakdowns, and had even witnessed its previous commander commit suicide in the control room during a brutal depth charge attack. But as Lang navigated the waters off the western coast of Africa in late May 1944, he believed his luck had turned. He was convinced that the vast expanse of the Atlantic offered total anonymity. He had no idea that he was sailing directly into a meticulously prepared trap, laid by an American task force that was not interested in sending him to the bottom of the sea. They were coming to steal his command, June 4, 1944, 150 miles off the coast of French West Africa, near the Cape Verde Islands. The sky was clear, the tropical sun beat down on the water, and Task Group 22.3 was patrolling on maximum combat readiness. The escort carrier Guadalcanal was steaming in the center of the formation, while its 5 destroyer escorts formed a protective outer screen, scanning the ocean depths with continuous active sonar sweeps. At precisely 11:09 a.m., the ping of active sonar shattered the routine aboard the destroyer escort USS Chatelaine. The sonar operator froze, adjusted his headset, and called out to the bridge, "Sonar contact. Heavy metallic return, close in. Hard to starboard." The Chatelaine swung violently to starboard, its twin screws churning the ocean into white foam. The contact was just 800 yards off the starboard bow, moving slowly at depth. The commander of the Chatelaine did not hesitate. He ordered an immediate attack using the vessel's Hedgehog launcher, a forward-firing spigot mortar that launched a pattern of 24 contact-detonated anti-submarine projectiles into the water. The Hedgehogs missed, but the contact was confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt. High above the fleet, 2 FM-2 Wildcat fighters launched from the deck of the Guadalcanal were banking sharply over the blue water. The fighter pilots had a crystal-clear view from the air down into the tropical ocean. Looking down through the swells, one of the pilots spotted a massive, dark, elongated shape moving just beneath the surface. The pilot immediately keyed his radio. "Stamboard to task group. I've spotted the sub. He's right off the Chatelaine's stern." The Wildcat pilots dove their aircraft toward the water, squeezing their triggers and firing their 50 caliber machine guns directly into the ocean. Long streams of incendiary tracer rounds splashed into the water, marking the exact perimeter of the submerged German submarine like a neon sign for the destroyers. The Chatelaine closed the distance rapidly. As she passed directly over the U-505's submerged position, her crew rolled a full pattern of heavy depth charges off the stern tracks and fired throwers from the sides. Seconds later, the ocean erupted. Deep beneath the surface, inside the steel pressure hull of the U-505, the world turned into absolute hell. The shockwaves from the depth charges detonated with catastrophic force around the submarine. The violent concussion threw German sailors across the compartments, slamming them against steel bulkheads and machinery. The internal lighting system instantly shattered, plunging the entire submarine into pitch-black darkness, illuminated only by the sparks of short-circuiting electrical panels. Heavy diesel machinery tore off its mounts. High-pressure water lines ruptured, spraying freezing seawater into the engineering spaces. The main steering rudders were jammed at a hard angle, and water began pouring rapidly into the stern bilges. choked by smoke. Surrounded by the screams of wounded men and feeling the submarine heavy in the stern, Oberleutnant Lange made a critical, panic-fueled assessment. He believed the depth charges had shattered the structural integrity of the outer hull, and that the U-505 was splitting in two. Fearing his crew would be crushed by the immense pressure of the deep ocean, Lange gave the ultimate emergency command: blow all main ballast tanks. Surface immediately. High-pressure air rushed into the ballast tanks, forcing hundreds of tons of water out. At 11:21 a.m., just 12 minutes after the first sonar contact, the U-505 broke the surface of the Atlantic Ocean in a massive geyser of white water and foam, just 700 yards away from the USS Chatelaine. The moment the German conning tower broke the surface, Captain Gallery's master plan went into motion. The American destroyers Chatelaine, Pillsbury, and Jenks instantly surrounded the surface submarine, opening fire with a devastating barrage of 20mm and 40mm automatic cannons, along with 50 caliber machine guns. The goal was not to blow the submarine out of the water with heavy 5-inch naval shells, but to sweep the conning tower and deck with a hail of light, high-velocity anti-personnel fire. As the German hatch opened, Oberleutnant Lange and his bridge crew stumbled out into the blinding sunlight, right into a wall of American gunfire. Lange was severely wounded almost instantly, hit in the legs by shrapnel, and collapsed onto the bridge deck. Below deck, the sound of thousands of rounds striking the outer hull sounded like a jackhammer rattling against the steel. Inside the darkened, smoke-filled submarine, terror turned into total panic. The German sailors believed the Americans were systematically executing anyone who reached the deck. The executive officer, assuming command from the incapacitated Lange, shouted the final desperate orders to abandon ship and scuttle the vessel. Alle Mann von Bord, U-Boot versenken. In their overwhelming rush to escape what they believed was a sinking steel coffin under heavy fire, the German crew cracked under the pressure. The disciplined, ironclad German scuttling protocols completely collapsed in a matter of seconds. The crew opened a few sea strainers in the lower bilges, but in their sheer panic, they failed to open the main, large-diameter ballast tank scuttling valves. More importantly, no one set the fuses on the explosive demolition charges designed to destroy the submarine's interior. The crew scrambled up the ladders, threw their wounded commander over the side into the ocean, and leapt blindly into the water. Within minutes, 59 German sailors were floating in their life jackets, leaving their invincible U-boat completely unmanned. Floating on the surface, its electric motors still running in a slow, left-hand circle at 7 knots and slowly taking on water. On the bridge of the USS Pillsbury, Lieutenant Albert David watched the German crew leaping into the sea through his binoculars. He turned to his boarding party and saw the opportunity of a lifetime. Over the loudspeakers of the Pillsbury, the order echoed across the water. "Away, boarders! Away!" A small wooden motor whaleboat was lowered into the choppy Atlantic waters. Inside was Lieutenant Albert David and a 9-man volunteer boarding party of young American sailors, including Petty Officers Arthur Knaspel and Stanley Wadowiak. As the whaleboat bounced violently over the waves, closing the distance to the circling, abandoned German submarine, the men checked their sidearms and held onto heavy canvas bags containing tools, salvage equipment, and tow lines. The U-505 was still moving under its own power, casting off a wake and rolling heavily in the Atlantic swells. As the whaleboat came alongside the slippery, oil-slicked deck of the enemy submarine, Lieutenant David waited for the crest of a wave and made a leap of sheer faith. He landed squarely on the steel casing of the U-505. Knaspel, Wadowiak, and the rest of the boarding party leapt right behind him. The American sailors found themselves standing on the deck of an active enemy warship in the middle of an ocean. The conning tower was covered in blood and bullet holes. The conning tower hatch stood wide open, a dark, silent void leading down into the bowels of the submarine. Lieutenant David drew his .45 caliber pistol. He had no way of knowing if fanatic German submariners were lying in wait at the bottom of the ladder with machine guns. He had no way of knowing if the explosive scuttling charges had been set with short fuses and were 2 seconds away from blowing the entire submarine into 1,000 pieces. Without waiting for backup, without a moment of hesitation, Lieutenant Albert David swung himself over the hatch combing and slid down the steel ladder into the pitch-black, silent interior of the enemy U-boat. The air inside the U-505 was foul, heavy with the suffocating stench of burnt diesel oil, ozone, electrical insulation, and the metallic tang of spilled blood. Water was sloshing over the lower deck plates, rising inch by inch toward the massive lead-acid main. Batteries located beneath the floorboards, a lethal condition that, if flooded with salt water, would instantaneously release clouds of deadly, suffocating chlorine gas throughout the enclosed space. Lieutenant David reached the bottom of the ladder and signaled for Knaspel and Wodowiak to follow. Armed only with flashlights and pistols, the three young Americans moved through the ghostly compartments with mechanical, practiced precision. They scrambled through the control room and into the radio room and officers' quarters. David's eyes scanned the desks and navigation tables. There, lying completely open and unguarded, was the holy grail of Allied naval intelligence, a fully operational, intact four-rotor naval Enigma machine, complete with its rotor-set daily cipher keys, secret grid charts of the entire Atlantic Ocean, code books printed in special ink, and the secret recognition signals for the entire German Navy. David didn't waste a second. He began grabbing armfuls of priceless intelligence documents, stuffing them into waterproof canvas bags, and passing them up the ladder to the waiting sailors on deck. Meanwhile, Knaspel and Wodowiak raced into the flooded lower engineering spaces to stop the incoming water. Working in pitch darkness with water up to their knees, they found the main sea valve open, with a 3-inch stream of ocean water pouring uncontrollably into the bilge. Using sheer brute force and field improvisation, Knaspel managed to locate the valve cover, jam it back over the pipe, and crank the wheel shut, sealing the leak. Nearby, Wodowiak discovered an uncovered 500-pound demolition charge with its fuse intact, which he carefully disarmed and rendered safe. While the engineering team worked below, the American sailors above deck executed an act of pure naval audacity. They hauled a heavy steel tow hawser from the USS Pillsbury and secured it to the bow cleat of the captured German submarine. For the first time since the War of 1812, the United States Navy had captured an enemy warship on the high seas. But the battle to keep her afloat was just beginning. The U-505 was still severely waterlogged, riding dangerously low in the water, and in constant danger of plunging into the depths under her own weight. Realizing the destroyer escort Pillsbury was too light to tow the massive 1,100-ton submarine across thousands of miles of ocean, Captain Daniel Gallery took a calculated risk that shocked his bridge crew. Gallery maneuvered his massive aircraft carrier, the USS Guadalcanal, directly alongside the drifting, waterlogged submarine in rough seas. American sailors passed massive salvage hoses and heavy electrical cables from the deck of the carrier down into the U-505. American naval engineers scrambled aboard the U-boat, connected temporary generator lines to the submarine's auxiliary pumps, and began pumping hundreds of tons of seawater back into the ocean. Then Captain Gallery executed a stroke of pure field genius. He ordered his engineers to alter the dive plane controls of the U-505, setting them to force the submarine to ride higher in the water. Furthermore, as the massive aircraft carrier towed the German submarine through the ocean at 8 knots, the water rushing past the U-505's propellers forced the ship's twin screws to spin, turning the submarine's electric propulsion motors into massive, improvised generators that successfully recharged the U-boat's main internal batteries. The intelligence harvest pulled from the U-505 was beyond the wildest dreams of the Allied High Command. In addition to the four-rotor Enigma machine and thousands of pages of secret codebooks, the Americans captured 2 intact, highly classified acoustic torpedoes, the Zaunkönig T5, which allowed Allied naval engineers to analyze the homing technology and immediately design effective acoustic noisemaker countermeasures, saving countless Allied ships for the remainder of the war. The capture of the U-505 was a victory so monumental and so utterly catastrophic to the German war effort that the United States government classified the entire operation under the absolute highest level of military secrecy, top secret ultra. If the Kriegsmarine ever discovered that the U-505 had been captured intact rather than sunk, Grand Admiral Dönitz would instantly order every Enigma machine, rotor configuration, and codebook in the entire German military replaced, completely blinding Allied intelligence. To keep the secret safe, the 58 captured German sailors from the U-505 were treated as ghosts. They were taken off the American ships under cover of darkness, whisked away to an isolated, high-security prisoner of war camp in Ruston, Louisiana, and kept completely segregated from all other German POWs in America. They were denied access to the International Red Cross and were forbidden from sending letters home to their families. For the remainder of the war, the families of the crew, as well as the German High Command, believed that Commander Lang and the entire crew of the U-505 had perished at the bottom of the ocean. Unaware of the capture, Karl Dönitz and the Kriegsmarine headquarters continued to transmit thousands of operational radio messages to their U-boat fleets using the compromised Enigma ciphers. In a bomb-proof vault in Washington, D.C. and at Bletchley Park in England, Allied codebreakers were reading every single German naval transmission in real time, often before the German submarine captains on the water could decipher the messages themselves. For the final year of the Second World War, the invincible German U-boat fleet was systematically guided straight into carefully prepared American hunter-killer traps across the ocean. The German submarine force was effectively destroyed, losing over 75% of its men by the end of the war, the highest casualty rate of any branch of any military in modern history. When the U-505 was finally towed into the naval base at Bermuda, flying a massive American flag proudly above the captured Nazi Kriegsmarine ensign, the myth of German naval superiority was completely shattered. The Germans had relied on cold technology, iron rigidness, and an arrogant belief in their own cultural and strategic invincibility. The Americans answered with relentless industrial innovation, superior air-sea coordination, flexible tactical thinking, and the raw, unyielding courage of young men who were bold enough to jump onto a sinking enemy submarine in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and steal it right out from under Hitler's nose. For his legendary courage in leading the boarding party down into the dark, booby-trapped submarine, Lieutenant Albert David was awarded the Medal of Honor, the only Medal of Honor awarded in the Atlantic Fleet during the entire Second World War. Tragically, David died of a sudden heart attack just weeks before the end of the war, never seeing the peace he helped secure. Today, the U-505 does not rest at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean as a rusted, forgotten wreck. Through the tireless efforts of Captain Daniel Gallery and the city of Chicago, the U-505 was saved from the scrap heap in 1954. It was transported through the Great Lakes and now rests permanently inside a massive, climate-controlled underground exhibit at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, Illinois. There, millions of visitors walk through its steel bulkheads every year. A 700-ton steel monument to the day American ingenuity, daring, and resolve took the ocean back, crushed the arrogance of the Nazi war machine, and taught the world a lesson in American military dominance that history will never forget. The capture of U-505 not only deprived the Germans of one of their most feared ocean predators, but also handed the Allies the keys to breaking the Enigma machine's most guarded secrets, an act of pure audacity that saved thousands of lives in the Atlantic. Stories like this prove that courage and human ingenuity can overcome any war machine. If you want to keep exploring the most defining moments of military history with the depth they truly deserve, make sure to subscribe to Warlog History and hit that notification bell so you never miss our upcoming documentaries. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next mission.